Risk management decides whether your company survives a storm or sinks. And no, I'm not talking about hackers in hoodies. The biggest risks often come from the boring things: an unpatched server, a missed approval, or a supplier who forgot their update. Here's a quick story. There was one company that spent weeks preparing for a penetration test. They hardened systems, wrote policies, even trained staff. But the auditor did not need any of them. She found one forgotten Excel file with client data sitting on a shared drive wide open. That single oversight cost the company more headaches than all the technical tests combined. That is what risk management is really about. Not chasing every threat, but knowing which risks actually matter and managing them before they manage you. Hi, I am Laura. I passed the CISM after years away from formal studying, and here I make the hard stuff simple. This video is your shortcut to domain 2 of risk management of CISM. We will cover how to assess risk, how to respond with the 4Ts, who owns what, how to monitor and report risk, and we'll wrap up with exam tricks you don't want to miss. And I will test you along the way. And if you make it to the end, I've got a free risk management cheat sheet that's waiting for you. All the keywords that you need in one place. So grab a coffee, stay with me, and let's dive into domain 2. This is your CISM session with Laura, and let's make security more simple. Domain 2 is a big chunk of the exam, about 20%, which means roughly 30 questions. It builds directly on what we covered in governance, but now the focus shifts to identifying, analyzing, and treating the risk. So let's see the stage before we dive deeper. To do that, let's look at the learning objectives for this domain. In this part, we will look at how to apply risk assessment strategies, identify threats and vulnerabilities, select treatment options, assign ownership, and report effectively. These are not just exam points. They are what make risk management work in practice. So let's talk about why this actually matters. Risk management helps anticipate and reduce unexpected losses, minimize the impact of incidents, and make business decisions that are informed instead of blind. And most importantly, it keeps security aligned with the actual goal of the business. Without it, security efforts often go in the wrong direction. And to make sense of all of this, we need first to define the different types of risk. We distinguish between several types. Inherent risk is what exists with no controls. Current risk reflects the baseline controls that are already in place. Calculated risk is what you measure after assessment. Residual risk, it is what's left after treatment. And capacity is what the organization can actually absorb. Together, these give a full picture of exposure. Now, let's see how risk management plays out as an ongoing cycle. Risk management is not a one-time task. It's a loop. Identify risks, analyze them, respond with the right treatment, and monitor over time. It's continuous and iterative because the risk landscape is always changing. New threats appear, and old ones evolve. To guide that cycle, organizations often rely on established frameworks. COVID ties governance and risk together. ISO 27005 is dedicated to information security risk management. ISO 31000 provides general principles, and NIST 830 gives detailed steps for risk assessment. You don't need to memorize every clause, just know which framework fits which purpose. All right, so now let's test your understanding with a quick practice question. In the very first steps of a risk management program, what gets established? Think about what comes before policies or committees. What's the foundation? And the correct answer is D, program context and purpose. Without that, management support and policies do not have direction. It's always about starting with clarity. And that wraps up the intro. Now let's move into the core of risk management, which is risk assessment. All right, so let's talk about the core of risk management, that is risk assessment. On paper, it looks simple. Risks equals likelihood times impact. But in practice, it's very messy. Here's a story. In a risk workshop, the CIO asked the team, what is the biggest risk that we face right now? One manager said cyber attacks. Another one said staff turnover. The finance lead insisted it was the currency fluctuations. And the room turned into a huge debate club. Why? Because everyone had a different idea of what was likelihood and impact. That is why frameworks exist. They give us a shared language so risks are not based on opinions but on structured analysis. In this section, I will break down the formula behind risk, threats and vulnerabilities, qualitative versus quantitative methods, and the exam traps that ISACA loves to use. Once that you see how the pieces fit, the questions stop being tricky and start being predictable. Risk is defined as a likelihood multiplied by impact. Likelihood is the chance that something happens, scored as high, medium, or low, or measured in probabilities, like percentages. Impact is the damage when a risk materializes, financial, reputational, legal, or even safety related. Together, they determine how we prioritize risk. Now, to understand risk, we need to look at what causes it, the threats. A threat is anything that can cause harm. It can be intentional, accidental, human, technical, or natural. The key is that the threat is the source of risk, and threats fall into several categories. Internal threats can be accidental, like somebody sending the wrong file, or they can be deliberate, like an insider with too much access or a grievance. Because insiders know the systems, they can be especially dangerous. External threats include hackers, espionage, sabotage, or even system failures. Environmental threats come from disaster or pandemics, and emerging threats arise from things like cloud, IoT, or being your own device. You'll often notice them through indicators, unusual logs, repeated alarms, or systems slowing down. Controls need to evolve as fast as the technology does. Now, let's look more closely at these last types and one of the most serious advanced persistent threats. An APT is a highly skilled, well funded attacker who compromises systems, gains a foothold, moves laterally, and quietly steals data over time. They are not smash and grab. They are long term and stealthy, which makes them so dangerous. But the threat only matters if it can exploit a weakness. That is where vulnerabilities come in. A vulnerability is a weakness that the threat can exploit. It can be technical, like weak configurations or unpatched systems, human, like lack of awareness, or process based, like outsourced gaps. Some are known, some only show up when tested. Once that you have identified threats and vulnerabilities, you need a method to measure risk. Now, let's compare the main techniques for that. There are three approaches. On one side of the spectrum, qualitative analysis uses scales like high, medium, low. It's good when you don't have enough data or when risks are intangible, like reputation. It is less precise, but it helps drive discussions. Quantitative analysis, on the other hand, uses numbers and money values. Metrics like single loss expectancy and annualized loss expectancy. It's more accurate, but requires more data and effort. And semi quantitative is a hybrid approach that mixes the two, given structure without requiring a full dataset. For example, assigning scores from 1 till 5. Now, here's a quick exam style question to reinforce this concept. To improve accuracy in a risk assessment, what is the most important factor? Don't overthink it. Consider the human side. And the correct answer is A, training and calibrating the assessor. Risk assessments depend on judgment, and consistent training reduces subjectivity. That is the nuance that ISACA is testing here. Okay, this wraps up risk assessment. Next, we will look at how to actually respond to risk. So, you have assessed the risk. Now comes the hard part. What do you actually do about them? This is where risk response comes in. Quick story. One company discovered that the legacy system was basically a time bomb. It was outdated, unpatched, and it was business critical. The IT team said, let's patch it. The vendor said, it's out of support, I'm sorry. And finance said, we don't have the budget for replacement. And the CEO, she just wanted the risk to disappear. Classic tug of war. But here's the truth. There's no magic fix. Every response falls into four buckets: avoid, mitigate, transfer, or accept. The art of risk management is knowing which one to choose and making sure that it aligns with the organization's appetite and tolerance. In this part, I will show you the 4Ds in action, how appetite versus tolerance really works, the exam traps that confuses the two, and how to document the responses in the ISACA way. Because if you can master the response, you have already solved half of risk management. Once that you have assessed the risk, the question is, what do you do about it? Every response fits into one of these 4Ds. Treat or mitigate is adding controls, like patching or encryption. This is usually the first line of defense. Terminate or avoid is stopping the risky activity. For example, canceling an insecure project. This is the cleanest option, but it is not always realistic if the business depends on that activity. Tolerate or accept is choosing to live with the risk if it is within risk appetite. So it must be an approved choice. And transfer is shifting the risk to a third party, like insurance or outsourcing. But remember, and you will get a question about this in the exam, liability never fully disappears. And also remember that risk treatment is not a one time event, it is iterative. Risk response is iterative. You treat, reassess, and repeat as needed. Residual risks may require additional controls later. Continuous improvement is part of the process. That's why risk management is never done. It evolves with the environment. Now, let's clarify appetite versus tolerance, one of the exam's favorite distinctions. Risk appetite is the broad willingness to take a risk, like being open to innovation. Risk tolerance is the acceptable variation within that appetite. For example, zero tolerance for compliance violations. Appetite sets the direction, and tolerance defines the limit. So watch out. This is often tested as a trap. Another common trap is the idea of eliminating risk completely. And the truth is, risk can only be reduced to acceptable levels, never removed entirely. So let's test appetite versus tolerance with a sample question. Why might management mitigate a risk that's above appetite but still within tolerance? Think about how leadership perceives the risk. And the correct answer is D. Management fears the impact is underestimated. Even if the numbers look acceptable, leaders might act cautiously if they believe that the risk could be worse. So this closes risk response. Now let's see who actually owns the risks and controls. Risk management does not work in theory alone. It works because real people take ownership. And that's where roles and accountability come in. Let me tell you a story. There was a risk register where the same name appeared over and over again. Every single risk was owned by the IT manager. When I asked her about it, she laughed and she said to me, apparently, I own the entire company right now. That is not accountability. That is a setup for failure. Here's the key. A risk owner is accountable for making decisions. A control owner is responsible for running the safeguard. If you mix those up, nobody really knows who should act when things go wrong. In this part, we will cover risk versus control owners and accountability in practice. Because the exam and real life both want to know one thing. When the risk hits, who's in the hook? A risk owner is accountable for decisions about the risk. They decide whether to mitigate, transfer, or accept it. A control owner is the one responsible for operating the safeguard that manages that risk. Both roles need to align, otherwise, risks will fall through the cracks. Let's put that into context with a picture of accountability across the organization. At the top, the board and senior management define risk appetite. Risk owners make the decisions about how to handle each risk. Control owners keep the safeguards running, and the CISO connects the dots, coordinating and reporting. Everyone has a role to play, and accountability is distributed. Now, here's a quick exam style check. What best describes the difference between a risk owner and a control owner? Just keep it simple. Who decides and who operates? And the correct answer is B. The risk owner is accountable for decisions, while the control owner operates the safeguard. That is the split that ISACA expects you to remember. And this finishes roles and accountabilities. Now we will look at how risks are monitored and reported. Here's the thing about risk. It doesn't just sit still once that you have assessed it. It changes, evolves, and sometimes sneaks up on you. That's why monitoring and reporting is critical. Quick story. At a company, phishing emails were flooding inboxes. The security team proudly said, don't worry, our awareness training is working because only 5% of employees clicked. But when they looked deeper, that 5% included the finance director, who had approval rights for $1 million payments. Suddenly, the metric did not look so comforting. Huh? That is the point of monitoring. It's not about pretty dashboards, it's about catching the warning lights before they turn into disasters. In this part, we will look at key risk indicators, KRIs, the risk registering practice, and integrating monitoring process into business processes, and how ISACA loves to test your ability to spot what is being measured versus what is being managed. Because if you can read the indicators the right way, you will always be one step ahead. As we discussed on the first domain, KRIs are early warning lights, metrics that show where risks are trending. They can be leading indicators that predict problems or lagging indicators that confirm them. Either way, they give management visibility before things get out of hand. Let's look at a few examples. Some practical KRIs could be the percentage of employees who click phishing emails, the number of vulnerabilities open more than 30 days, or the total downtime hours. Each gives a clear signal of risk exposure, but be careful and don't confuse them with KPIs. KRIs measure risk. KPIs measure performance. They can look similar, but only KRIs tell you how exposed the organization really is. Now, let's turn to another essential tool, the risk register. The risk register is a central log of risks. It records owners, treatments, and status. And most importantly, it's a living document, always updated as the risks evolve. Here's what it will look like in practice. Now, take this example. The risk is a potential server outage. The owner is the IT manager. The treatment is mitigation through failover. And the status is in progress.
Simple but powerful when you scale it across the whole organization. And of course, monitoring can't stay isolated. It has to be built in into the way that the business runs. Strong risk management means embedding monitoring into daily operations, into projects, change management, vendor reviews, and business continuity planning. That way, risk management is not an add on, it becomes business as usual. Let's finish with a quick KRI practice question. Which of these is the best example of a key risk indicator? Focus on which option really measures the exposure, not just the performance. And the correct answer is B, the number of open vulnerabilities older than 30 days. That's a direct measure of risk exposure. The others are performance metrics or not risk related. Okay, this wraps up monitoring and reporting. Next, let's move to the recap.
Let's wrap this up. We're going to do next a quick recap of domain 2. And then I will walk you through one final exam style question. I will not give you the answer right now because I want you to think about it. And in the next video, I will reveal the correct answer and explain why. For the next concepts that are coming, if you can explain it well and in your own words, you are exam ready for this domain. And if not, don't stress. This is exactly why I created the free risk management cheat sheet that I promise you will be able to find the link in the description below, as well as my other favorite CISM resources.
Let's do a quick recap of domain 2. Risk is always likelihood multiplied by impact. The four main responses are terminate or avoid, treat, mitigate, transfer, and tolerate or accept, also known as 4Ts. Appetite and tolerance need to align. And finally, accountability comes through risk owners, control owners, and KRIs. If you can explain these concepts back in your own words, you're ready for this domain. And if not, don't stress. I have put together a free risk management cheat sheet you can grab in the description. Before we finish, let me leave you with one last question that bridges to the next domain. Which situation poses the greatest risk to information security? Think carefully. This one comes from domain 2 that we just discussed, but it is also linked to domain 4 on incident management. I am not giving the answer just yet. You will get it at the start of domain 4, where we will break it down and we'll see why it matters for incident management. That way, you don't only learn the answer, but also understand the bigger picture. And that officially closes domain 2. I will see you back on camera for my last message.
Hey, and that's it. Congratulations. Domain 2 is a really big one, and we have covered a lot together. If you have made it this far, you should be proud. You are leveling up on your exam prep. Now, don't forget that on my website, you will find the complete free cheat sheet for this domain, plus other resources like my full CISM study guide and AI study prompts to speed up your revision, and my week by week exam planner. Everything in one place, ready for you. And make sure, please, that you subscribe because domain 3 on program management is coming up next, and you really don't want to miss it. I am Laura. This was your CISM session, and remember, let's keep security simple.